If you have special powers, there is a school for mutants that will accept you, and with a bit of luck, they will make you into a superhero. Now that sounds like a really cool school to me. Hello everybody, I'm Jay Mere and welcome to another ranking video. And in this video I want to rank another franchise, and this time I'm gonna talk about a superhero franchise, and this is one of my childhood favorites. I'm gonna rank all the X-Men movies from my least favorite to my absolute favorite. And yes, when I was a kid I was really loving these movies. I was a really big X-Men fan. This was one of my favorite superhero movies. I saw the first three movies so many times. I was a big fan of Wolverine, and then they expand this franchise with some new movies, with the prequel movies. And Wolverine get even solo movies. Then we got Deadpool solo movies. We even got this really random movie with some horror elements. So it's a really big franchise. We have like 14 movies in this franchise. And obviously not all of them are good and successful. Some are really bad, but for the most part I really love the X-Men franchise, and this will always be a nostalgia franchise, a childhood favorite of mine, and even as an adult most of these movies I can really enjoy. So now we have Deadpool and Wolverine movie coming out. Well, it's really playing in the theaters now. I did a whole review on that movie. Always be free to check out that review if you want to hear my thoughts on it. I do not talk about spoilers in that movie. Also in this ranking I'm going to be very vague about talking about that movie. And I was really pleased to have this movie. That was a childhood wish of mine. Unfortunately, the wish was fulfilled a little bit too late for me. You will see, it was very hard to place that movie in this ranking. It was a very hard job, and do not expect a very high position of that movie. You will see. Anyhow, let's get to the ranking. We have 14 movies to talk about. Gonna talk very briefly about every of them. I do not intend to make this a very long video. So let's start at number 14. My absolute unlikable movie. I cannot really stand this movie. I really had high hopes for this because I'm a horror fan, and seeing an X-Men movie with some horror elements, I was really up for that. But at number 14 I have The New Mutants. Yes, this is the horror-ish X-Men movie. And unfortunately, my expectations for this movie were not fulfilled. I was actually very disappointed by this movie. It was actually very boring, and everything that happened in this movie was not that interesting. Some scenes were actually very bad. It was a really boring story overall. I did not really care for the characters, even though we have Macy Williams, Charlie Heaton and Anya Taylor-Joy in this movie, but they couldn't save this movie for me. And also the horror elements in this movie, for me as a horror fan, they were pretty tame. So I absolutely do not like this movie at all. So it's my least favorite X-Men movie, and also in the franchise it's really a rare installment. So yeah, I couldn't care for this movie. Above that, at number 13, we have X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now, when I was a kid, this movie came out like when I was 11, I was actually very pleased with this movie. I was really glad with this standalone Wolverine movie. But when time goes by, this movie did not age that well. It's actually very bad. Basically we got the same backstory, the same story that we already got in the second X-Men movie, but now extended, and I don't know, it's actually pretty bad. Hugh Jackman is still good as Wolverine. Also really like in the beginning in this movie there is this evolution of Wolverine and Sabretooth. That was really cool, but unfortunately nothing else in this movie was that cool. Especially the third act was pretty terrible. They introduced some other mutants in this movie that had some cool ideas, like Deadpool was introduced in this movie, but they handle him very poorly. So a lot of bad decisions in this movie, and that make a bad movie. At number 12, another disappointment was X-Men Dark Phoenix. Now, this is a flavor to be placed at the bottom place, but I actually expected a much worse movie than I actually got. I really thought it was going to be a terrible movie, but when I saw the movie at home, it was not that bad at all. I still had a pretty good time. I did not like what they did with certain characters in the movie, especially with Mystique. That was just really stupid. Also, Quicksilver is not really that much in this movie. I really like that character. And it's a second attempt to do the Dark Phoenix story, but it was not a success. And actually, I prefer the first attempt over this one. So these were the movies that I do not really like that much. Now the next one is one I am mixed about, and that was the new movie actually, Deadpool and Wolverine at number 11. It's entertaining enough. I really like a lot of things in this movie, especially Wolverine in his yellow suit and most of the action scenes, and some nice surprises during the movie. But the movie, as entertaining as it is actually a big mess, and I'm not a fan of what they do with certain plot lines and characters in this movie. So it was a hard call. It was really hard to determine what position I had to give this movie, but it's stranded at 11. So the next movies are actually movies that I really like, and going from somewhat like to really loving it. And at number 10 I have X-Men Last Stand. Now it's a bit weird to place this movie above Deadpool and Wolverine, but I see both movies really as entertaining X-Men movies. Now X-Men The Last Stand, number 10, is not really that great of an X-Men movie. The Dark Phoenix plotline was not utilized to perfection. Did not really like what they do to certain characters, like with Cyclops or with Professor X. There were just terrible conclusions to those characters. And as a conclusion to this X-Men trilogy from the 2000s, they could have done a better job. But even so, the movie is still very entertaining. Every time I watch this movie, even though with all these problems, I still have a pretty good time with it. So that's why it's still at number 10. And at number 9 we have the second Deadpool. Now there was a time when I would have placed this much higher in the ranking. The time when I was really in this Deadpool phase, when I had the Deadpool vibe and I was loving the Deadpool. But now I'm not really in that phase anymore, and Deadpool 2 is not really a movie that I go rewatch that often. Still, it's a pretty good movie. I really have fun watching that movie, but I have some issues with it. Certain things are a bit dragged out, but still, it's a perfect Deadpool sequel and deserving the 9th spot in this ranking. At number 8, maybe a surprise, because this one is not really the most loved movie. Actually, it's a pretty disliked X-Men movie, and that's X-Men Apocalypse. And I saw this in theaters and I actually loved it. Did not like the third act, that was really too bombastic. But back at that time, superhero movies really had that problem. A too bombastic third act. But all in all, this movie is actually pretty decent, and I do not always understand why people are disliking it. Like in the opening scene we go back to ancient Egypt. It is one of the better ancient Egypt storylines I have seen in movies. Most movies don't do ancient Egypt that great, to be honest. Apocalypse, maybe not the best portrayal of this character, but I still like this character. I still like him as a villain in this movie. I still love all these characters and what they do in this movie. Now, these remaining 7 are really the X-Men movies that I really love. And at number 7 I have the Wolverine. The second Wolverine solo film. and this is much better than our first attempt. And it is the Wolverine in Japan. And I always thought this is a very cool movie. Maybe not with the best ending to the story, but it was very entertaining. I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine in this movie. A lot of great stuff happening in this movie. Only problem this movie have for getting it a bit higher in the ranking is that it is not the most rewatchable movie. Like the 6 above this are the X-Men movies that I rewatch more often. And in number 6 we have the first Deadpool movie. And now when this movie came out, I had an absolute blast with this movie. This was something fresh for the superhero movie, even though we already had something Deadpool-ish with Kick-Ass in 2010. But Deadpool was actually a cool movie to have in this franchise. Deadpool is a great character, fantastically portrayed by Ryan Reynolds, who is Deadpool. Great action scenes, great humor, and I love Deadpool. And this movie still holds up 8 years later. And yeah, it's one of the best X-Men movies in this franchise. I love Deadpool. At number 5 we have the very first X-Men movie, X-Men. Maybe not the best dated movie now, has some dating issues, but still, for me it holds up. Maybe it has something to do with the nostalgia factor. I have seen this so many times as a kid. It was one of my favorite movies as a kid, and every time I watch it I still have a blast seeing this movie. It's our introduction to many of these great characters. The first time I saw Wolverine, I was immediately a fan of this character, and I still am. But other characters are great as well. Magneto, Rogue, even some of the villains like Sabretooth left a good impression. Also a very simple story, but executed to perfection. The only problem I kinda have in this movie is those latex suits. I don't know, it's a bit weird. I just wished for some other costumes for these superheroes. But all in all, the first X-Men movie, it's a superhero classic. It's one of my favorite X-Men movies in this franchise. And at number 4 we have X-Men First Class. Now we had a disappointing final conclusion of the X-Men trilogy. We have a very disappointing Wolverine solo film. So the X-Men franchise was a bit, it was not really popular anymore. And then there was X-Men First Class, kind of a reboot of the franchise. It's a prequel. We go all the way back to the 60s, focusing on Charles Xavier and Magneto when they were younger. And that was actually very interesting to see how they started it. And it's actually a very cool story. Love these characters, love how the story was developed, love the action scenes, and it was actually a very cool X-Men movie, and I'm still loving it. But the sequel is better. Number 3 now we have X-Men Days of Future Past, and this is one of the best superhero movies ever. And the main reason for that is that they combine the X-Men from the 2000s with this new generation in a really nice way. And Wolverine, once again played by Hugh Jackman, travels back in time to meet the new cast, the younger versions of Magneto and Professor X, and it was fantastic. Also, we got the introduction of Quicksilver, who had an amazing scene in this movie. And yeah, this movie is just awesome. That's what it is, an awesome X-Men movie. And there are just 2 movies better than this. And at number 2 we have X-Men 2, X United. And this was one of my favorite movies as a kid as well. Was a huge step up from the first movie. This has not dating issues. It still holds up today. And we got a bit more of Wolverine's backstory. The stakes are much higher in this. We have a better villain with Stryker, because Magneto I always saw as an anti-hero, not really as a villain. Even though I understand his motives always, especially in the first movie. And also the way they bring Magneto back in this movie was also very fantastic. It all come together in the third act, and I really believe that every of these characters has a moment to shine. And we have even a new character with Nightcrawler. He had a very cool opening scene in this movie. This is a cool X-Men movie and I'm always loving it, still loving it, and in the future I will probably still love it. And then in 2017 we got my favorite X-Men movie. Also a solo Wolverine movie, we also got Professor X in that movie. Of course, I'm talking about Logan. This is one of my favorite movies ever. And I really like what James Mangold does with this movie. He brings a new flavor to the superhero movie. First of all, we got an older version of Logan, played perfect by Hugh Jackman. And then how he has dealt with this world in which mutants are basically dying. There are not much left. He has to take care of Professor X, who is very old and starting to have some dementia problems, which is very problematic with his superpowers. And then he finds out that he has this kid who is very similar to him, that he has to take care of, that he has to protect. It's just an awesome story, and I really love this Western feel that this movie has. I love everything about this movie. I don't think I have any issues with it, and it's a perfect way to conclude the X-Men franchise, and especially to conclude these characters of Professor X and especially Wolverine. This is the perfect ending for that character, and that's why it's one of my favorite movies ever, and definitely the best X-Men movie. So guys, this was my ranking of all 14 X-Men movies. I hope you enjoyed my ranking. Always be free to share your ranking of the X-Men movies below in the comments. And if you want to see more rankings of franchises, always be free to subscribe to my channel. And till the next time.